Thank you, everyone. This means so much. I am truly honored.
Claire Bennett
Thank you,
stood beneath the
everyone.
golden lights of the
This
Grand
means so
Meridian Ballroom,
much. I
while
am
200
truly
people
honored.
applauded around her. But the only sound she could truly hear was the sharp ringing in her chest. Across the room, seated at table 12 beneath a chandelier made of imported Italian crystal, sat the two people who had once destroyed her life. Her ex-husband, Daniel Bennett, stared toward the stage with the same confident posture he had spent decades perfecting, but his confidence had cracks now. Tiny ones, the kind only fear creates. Beside him sat Vanessa Cole, the woman who had spent years humiliating Claire long before Daniel ever entered the picture. Vanessa still wore elegance like armor, diamond earrings, silk gown, perfect posture. But even from the stage, Claire could see her fingers trembling around the stem of her champagne glass. 3 years earlier, they had laughed while her marriage collapsed in public. Tonight, they were waiting for her approval to keep their jobs, and neither of them understood that this moment had not happened by chance. Claire had been building toward this night long before either of them realized she was capable of rebuilding herself at all. The applause
Thank you,
continued while
everyone.
Claire smiled
This
politely
means
at the
so
executives
much.
surrounding her,
I
but
am
her
truly
mind
honored.
drifted backward through time toward a version of herself that almost nobody in that ballroom would recognize anymore. There was a time when Claire Bennett apologized for speaking too loudly in meetings, a time when she lowered her eyes whenever someone interrupted her, a time when she believed loyalty alone could save a marriage. That woman no longer existed. She had disappeared somewhere between betrayal and survival, somewhere between humiliation and reinvention. The audience in the ballroom saw a composed corporate strategist worth hundreds of millions of dollars. They saw a woman powerful enough to restructure one of the largest architecture firms in Chicago. They saw confidence, precision, influence. What they did not see was the lonely woman who once sat awake at 3 in the morning staring at old family photos, while wondering how someone she loved for 22 years could erase her so completely. Daniel shifted in his chair when Claire finally stepped toward the microphone. The room softened into silence. Claire's eyes locked onto his for only a moment, but it was enough to make him look away first. That detail mattered more than anyone else realized. Daniel Bennett had never looked away first. Not during arguments, not during the divorce, not even the afternoon he stood in their kitchen, calmly explaining why he was leaving her for another woman while Claire struggled to breathe through the shock. Back then he had spoken with certainty. He believed he understood exactly who his wife was, weak, predictable, safe. He thought she would spend the rest of her life quietly recovering from the damage he caused, while he moved forward into a newer, shinier future beside Vanessa Cole. What Daniel never understood was that some people do not transform when life becomes easy. Some people transform when humiliation leaves them with nothing left to lose. Claire thanked the audience for attending the gala, but her voice remained calm and controlled, almost gentle. The same softness that once made people underestimate her had become her greatest weapon. Vanessa whispered something into Daniel's ear. Claire noticed it immediately. Vanessa had always whispered before causing damage. She did it in high school hallways before spreading rumors. She did it at parties before humiliating classmates. She did it during charity dinners while smiling sweetly at people she secretly despised. Claire knew all her habits because Vanessa Cole had shaped most of her teenage years through fear. Long before Daniel ever betrayed her, Vanessa had already taught Claire what it felt like to become invisible in a crowded room. Before we go deeper into this story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The truth is, revenge stories rarely begin with revenge. They begin with humiliation, with silence, with moments so painful that they quietly reshape the person experiencing them. For Claire Bennett, that moment happened on a rainy Thursday evening in October, 3 years before the ballroom gala. She remembered every detail because betrayal has a way of preserving ordinary moments forever. She remembered the smell of wet pavement drifting through the kitchen window. She remembered reheating dinner for the third time because Daniel texted saying he would be late from work again. She remembered staring at the clock while convincing herself not to overthink things. 22 years of marriage teaches people how to ignore warning signs. You learn how to excuse distance, how to rationalize silence, how to explain away coldness because admitting the truth feels too dangerous. At exactly 9:14 p.m., Daniel walked through the front door carrying the scent of expensive cologne Claire had never smelled before. His tie was loosened, his expression unreadable. He barely looked at her when he placed his keys on the counter. Claire asked if he wanted dinner. Daniel said he already ate. That answer alone should have terrified her, because Daniel Bennett never missed dinner at home, unless something important happened at work. But Claire had spent most of her marriage making excuses for other people's behavior. It was a survival skill she learned young. Daniel poured himself a drink without removing his jacket, and then he said 7 words that permanently divided Claire's life into before and after. "I think we want different things now." Claire remembered blinking at him across the kitchen island, while her brain struggled to understand what was happening. She actually laughed at first because the sentence sounded rehearsed, artificial, like dialogue from a movie scene neither of them belonged in. Daniel continued, speaking calmly, explaining how they had grown apart, how he needed more excitement in life, how he deserved happiness. People often imagine betrayal arrives through screaming arguments or explosive confrontations, but sometimes it arrives quietly. Sometimes the person destroying your life speaks gently while doing it. Then Claire asked the question she already feared she knew the answer to. "Is there someone else?" Daniel did not answer immediately. That silence became more painful than the confession itself. When he finally looked at her, there was guilt in his eyes, but there was also relief. Relief that the truth no longer needed hiding. Her name was Vanessa Cole, the same Vanessa Cole who once locked 16-year-old Claire inside a school gym storage room during prom night, while classmates laughed outside the door. The same Vanessa Cole who spread rumors claiming Claire's family was poor after Claire's father lost his job. The same Vanessa who smiled beautifully while destroying people socially. Claire had not spoken to her in over 25 years, and somehow, impossibly, she had returned through the center of Claire's marriage like a wrecking ball aimed directly at her past. Daniel tried explaining that reconnecting with Vanessa happened accidentally during a charity fundraiser organized through his architecture firm. He claimed it started innocently. Coffee meetings, networking conversations, shared memories. But Claire barely heard him anymore because her mind had already begun connecting pieces she previously ignored. The late-night meetings, the sudden obsession with appearance, the guarded phone screen, the emotional distance. Everything aligned at once with terrifying clarity. And then Daniel said something Claire would never forgive for the rest of her life. "She understands me in a way you stopped trying to." Stop trying. Claire felt those words settle into her chest heavier than the affair itself. Because she had spent 22 years trying, she supported Daniel while he built his career from a tiny office above a hardware store into one of Chicago's most respected architecture companies. She handled their home while he traveled. She raised their daughter while he worked late nights. She edited his presentations, helped prepare investor pitches, organized client events. Claire had quietly helped build almost every success Daniel proudly claimed as his own. And now the woman who once bullied her as a teenager was receiving credit for understanding the man Claire spent half her life supporting. Daniel moved into a luxury apartment downtown less than 2 weeks later. Vanessa appeared publicly beside him almost immediately afterward. That part hurt too. The speed of it, the confidence, the absence of shame. Claire watched mutual friends slowly distance themselves, unsure how to navigate the scandal without damaging their relationships with Daniel. Some avoided her calls entirely. Others offered shallow sympathy while continuing to attend dinners and vacations with Daniel and Vanessa. Betrayal rarely destroys only one relationship. It exposes every fragile connection surrounding it. The worst moment came 1 month after the separation, during a charity event Claire almost refused to attend. She arrived, wearing a black dress she had not touched in years, because depression had already begun changing the way she saw herself. She remembered entering the ballroom alone and immediately feeling conversations shift around her. People looked away too quickly, smiled too carefully. Then Vanessa entered, holding Daniel's hand. Every head in the room turned. Vanessa wore Claire's anniversary necklace. The necklace Daniel gave Claire for their 20th wedding anniversary, a custom sapphire piece designed specifically for her. Claire felt the entire room notice it simultaneously. Vanessa touched the necklace intentionally during conversations, almost proudly. Daniel said nothing. He simply stood beside her, allowing the humiliation to happen publicly. Claire excused herself to the restroom before anyone could see her cry. But what broke her was not the necklace itself. It was the realization that Vanessa still enjoyed causing pain after all these years. Some people outgrow cruelty. Others refine it. Claire stood inside the restroom staring at herself in the mirror while muffled laughter echoed from outside the door. Her mascara had begun running slightly beneath her eyes. For several minutes, she genuinely considered disappearing completely from everyone who had ever known her. Starting over somewhere else. Becoming invisible. Because humiliation creates exhaustion unlike any other emotion. It makes existing feel heavy. But then something unexpected happened. Claire became angry. Not explosive anger. Not dramatic anger. Something colder. Sharper. The kind of anger that arrives when grief finally burns away and leaves clarity behind. Because for the first time in her life, Claire stopped asking why people hurt her and started asking why she allowed herself to remain powerless around them. And that question changed everything. Claire left the charity gala through a side exit 15 minutes later, while cold rain swept across the streets of downtown Chicago. She sat inside her car, gripping the steering wheel without turning the engine on, replaying the image of Vanessa touching that sapphire necklace like a trophy. Most people believe revenge begins with rage, but real revenge often begins with humiliation, so deep it changes the structure of your thinking. Claire did not drive home immediately that night. Instead, she sat parked beneath flickering streetlights until nearly midnight, asking herself a question she had avoided her entire adult life. What if everyone around her had been benefiting from the fact that she never fought back? The answer terrified her, because once she saw it, she could not unsee it anymore. Daniel built confidence by standing beside someone who constantly minimized herself. Vanessa maintained control by targeting people too emotionally exhausted to resist her. Even Claire's friends had grown comfortable with her silence, because silent people rarely disrupt anyone's comfort. For 47 years as Garance, Claire Bennett had mistaken endurance for strength. That realization became the first crack in the version of herself everyone thought they understood. The next morning, Claire woke with swollen eyes and a splitting headache after barely sleeping 2 hours. Her phone contained 17 unread messages. Some came from concerned relatives. Others came from mutual friends pretending to remain neutral while quietly gathering details about the scandal. One message stood out above the others. It came from Vanessa. "I truly hope one day you understand this wasn't intentional." Claire stared at the text for nearly 30 seconds before laughing softly to herself. Not intentional. As though affairs simply materialized from thin air. As though wearing another woman's anniversary necklace in public happened accidentally. Claire deleted the message without responding, but the sentence stayed with her all morning because it perfectly captured how people like Vanessa survived consequences. They transformed cruelty into misunderstanding. They disguised humiliation as honesty. And worst of all, they often convinced others to believe them. By noon, Claire finally forced herself to leave the house for groceries because the refrigerator sat nearly empty except for bottled water and leftover takeout containers. She had no appetite. Finish. She wore sunglasses despite the cloudy weather, hoping nobody would recognize her. Small-town gossip spreads quickly among wealthy Chicago suburbs, especially when successful marriages collapse publicly. Claire could already imagine the conversations happening behind closed doors. Daniel and Vanessa had become entertainment. Claire had become cautionary sympathy. Inside the grocery store, Claire kept her head lowered while pushing the cart quietly through aisles she once navigated automatically beside Daniel for over 2 decades. Ordinary things suddenly felt unbearable. Seeing his favorite coffee brand. Reaching instinctively for foods he liked before remembering he no longer lived there. Every routine carried tiny reminders of absence. That was the part nobody prepared you for after betrayal. Not the screaming arguments. Not the paperwork. The small empty moments that followed afterward. Then Claire heard someone say her name. She turned slowly and immediately recognized Olivia Mercer standing near the produce section. Olivia had known Claire since college and once spent nearly every holiday at the Bennett house, before life gradually pulled them into separate routines. Unlike most people lately, Olivia's expression carried genuine concern rather than curiosity. "Oh my God, Claire." The sympathy in her voice nearly broke Claire instantly. Olivia hugged her tightly without asking questions first, and for several seconds Claire forgot how exhausted she truly was until someone held her like she mattered again. They ended up sitting together inside the grocery store cafe while Claire reluctantly explained everything. Olivia listened quietly without interrupting, no forced optimism, No shallow advice, just listening. Then Olivia asked one question that lingered in Claire's mind long after their conversation ended. Did Daniel ever acknowledge how much of his company you built with him? Claire frowned slightly. What do you mean? Olivia leaned back carefully. Claire, half those client systems were yours. You practically managed investor communications for years. You helped write proposals. You reorganized staffing structures when the company almost collapsed in 2011. Daniel always presented himself as the genius architect, but everyone close to you knew how much work happened behind the scenes because of you. Claire immediately dismissed it out of habit. I was just helping my husband. Olivia stared at her for a long moment before shaking her head slowly. No, Claire, you were running half a corporation without realizing your value. That sentence followed Claire home like an echo. For the next several weeks, Claire moved through life mechanically, while the divorce process accelerated faster than she emotionally understood. Daniel hired expensive attorneys immediately. Vanessa appeared publicly beside him more often now, attending charity dinners and industry events as though she had always belonged there. Social media became another form of punishment. Photos surfaced constantly. Luxury restaurants, weekend trips to Napa Valley, smiling yacht pictures, mutual acquaintances leaving supportive comments beneath every post. Claire eventually stopped checking altogether after discovering someone had captioned one photo with the words, "Second chances can lead to the right love story." Second chances, as though Claire herself had simply been the wrong chapter. One evening, while sorting through old office storage boxes in the garage to distract herself from anxiety, Claire discovered several forgotten binders containing financial models and operational plans she created years earlier during Daniel's company expansion. She sat cross-legged on the garage floor, flipping through hundreds of pages while rain hammered against the roof overhead. Slowly, something unsettling became impossible to ignore. The most successful systems inside Bennett Architectural Group had originated from her. Employee retention structures, investor outreach strategies, client loyalty models. Even the emergency restructuring proposal that saved the company during the recession contained entire sections written in Claire's handwriting. Yet throughout the marriage, Daniel gradually absorbed ownership of every achievement until even Claire herself stopped recognizing her contributions. That realization hit harder than the affair, because betrayal wounds differently when you realize someone benefited from convincing you to underestimate yourself. Around midnight, Claire received another text from Daniel asking if they could keep things civil during the divorce proceedings. The message sounded polished and emotionally detached, almost corporate in tone. Claire stared at it while anger slowly replaced sadness again. Civil. Daniel wanted civility after publicly humiliating her with the woman who spent high school destroying her confidence. He wanted smooth paperwork and polite transitions while Claire rebuilt herself from emotional rubble. For the first time since the separation began, Claire chose not to respond immediately. Instead, she opened her laptop. Then she did something small that eventually changed the course of her entire life. She searched her own name online. At first, the results frustrated her. Charity committee mentions, old neighborhood newsletters, photographs where she stood smiling beside Daniel at fundraising events while captions described him as the visionary founder of Bennett Architectural Group. Claire kept scrolling until she found an archived Business Journal article from 2012 discussing the company's recovery during a financial downturn. Buried halfway through the article appeared one sentence, "Internal operational restructuring, reportedly organized by Daniel Bennett's wife, Claire Bennett, helped stabilize investor confidence during the company's most difficult quarter." Claire reread the line several times. Then she searched deeper. Over the next 3 hours, Claire uncovered dozens of forgotten references connecting her quietly to some of the company's biggest strategic successes. Internal newsletters praising organizational improvements, conference acknowledgments, email chains, investor notes, tiny fragments of recognition she previously ignored because she never viewed herself as professionally important. By 3 a.m., Claire sat frozen in front of her computer while a thought formed slowly in her mind. What if Daniel's greatest achievement had never been architecture? What if it had been convincing Claire she mattered less than she actually did? The next morning, Claire called Olivia and asked for a recommendation to a therapist. Not because she wanted healing speeches or motivational affirmations. She needed clarity. She needed someone capable of helping her untangle 22 years of emotional conditioning that left her believing survival alone counted as fulfillment. That decision led her to Dr. Evelyn Ross. Evelyn's office overlooked Lake Michigan from the 19th floor of a quiet downtown building, decorated with warm lighting and shelves packed with psychology books. Claire expected therapy to feel uncomfortable or performative. But Evelyn spoke with unsettling precision during their very first session. "You keep describing yourself through what other people needed from you." Evelyn observed calmly after listening for nearly an hour. "Tell me who Claire Bennett is, without explaining how useful she's been to everyone else." Claire opened her mouth to answer, then stopped, because she genuinely did not know anymore. The silence stretched painfully between them. Evelyn did not rescue her from it, and for the first time in decades, Claire confronted the possibility that she had spent most of her life disappearing into support roles for people who never intended to protect her in return. Weeks passed. Winter settled over Chicago in gray sheets of snow and freezing rain while Claire slowly rebuilt routines from scratch. Therapy sessions, morning walks, reading, journaling, long hours examining parts of herself she ignored for years. The loneliness remained brutal at times, especially inside the quiet house, where every room still carried traces of the family life she once believed permanent. But beneath the grief, something else had started forming: awareness. Claire began noticing how often she apologized unnecessarily during conversations, how quickly she minimized her own accomplishments, how instinctively she made herself smaller around confident personalities. These habits had existed so long they felt invisible until now. One afternoon after therapy, Claire stopped at a small coffee shop near the lake and overheard two younger women discussing salary negotiations at a nearby table. One woman nervously worried about asking for more money despite managing most of her department's workload. The other encouraged her firmly. "People only value what you teach them to value." Claire nearly dropped her coffee hearing that sentence, because suddenly she understood something terrifying about her marriage. Daniel had not simply betrayed her emotionally. He had built an entire identity partially from her willingness to remain unseen. That night, Claire reopened the old company binders again. This time, she did not look through them like sentimental memories. She examined them like evidence. And for the first time in her life, Claire Bennett began wondering exactly how powerful she might have become if she had ever demanded recognition for the things she quietly built. Claire spent the next several days inside her home office, surrounded by old folders, financial reports, presentation drafts, and years of forgotten paperwork that suddenly looked completely different through new eyes. What once felt like memories of supporting her husband now resembled proof of something much larger. Every document revealed another invisible contribution: investor communication templates, client retention strategies, emergency staffing restructures, marketing language Daniel once delivered confidently during board meetings, after rehearsing it with Claire at their kitchen table. She remembered those nights clearly now. Daniel pacing with anxiety while Claire calmly reorganized his ideas into language investors could trust. Back then, she viewed it as being a supportive wife. Now she understood. She had spent years functioning like an unpaid executive operating behind the curtain of someone else's reputation. The realization made her physically ill at first, not because she wanted credit desperately, but because she finally recognized how thoroughly she had erased herself over the years. Claire began replaying moments from her marriage differently now. The times Daniel interrupted her during dinner parties, whenever conversations became too intellectual. The subtle jokes about Claire overthinking everything. The way he introduced her simply as wife, even at events where she helped organize entire corporate partnerships behind the scenes. None of it looked harmless anymore. It looked strategic, maybe not consciously at first, but gradually, slowly, like water wearing down stone over decades until the original shape disappeared entirely. One snowy Tuesday afternoon, Claire received an unexpected phone call from Rebecca Lawson, a former senior operations manager at Bennett Architectural Group. Rebecca sounded nervous before Claire even answered fully. "I hope this isn't inappropriate," Rebecca began carefully, "but there's something I think you should know." Claire sat quietly, while Rebecca explained that Daniel's company had been struggling financially for almost a year. Several expansion projects were failing. Investors were nervous. Internal leadership turnover had become severe. Two major clients recently ended contracts unexpectedly after repeated management issues. Claire frowned. None of this matched the polished success Daniel displayed publicly online. Rebecca hesitated before continuing. Honestly, after you left, things started falling apart faster than most people expected. The sentence settled heavily between them. Claire asked what she meant. Rebecca laughed softly, though there was no humor in it. Claire, everyone inside the company knew you were the one keeping Daniel organized. Maybe not officially, but operationally. You stabilized him. After the divorce, he became distracted, emotional. Vanessa got involved in branding decisions and pushed him toward expensive image-focused projects that looked flashy, but weren't sustainable. Vanessa again, always Vanessa. Claire thanked Rebecca for calling, but after hanging up, she remained motionless at her desk for several minutes, while snow drifted silently outside her office window. For years, she convinced herself Daniel succeeded because he possessed talents she lacked. Now, former employees were quietly confirming something she barely dared consider herself. Maybe Daniel had needed her more than she ever needed him. That thought frightened her almost as much as it empowered her. A week later, Claire attended a leadership seminar recommended by Olivia, despite initially resisting the idea. The event took place at a luxury downtown hotel filled with executives, consultants, and entrepreneurs discussing corporate strategy and investment growth. Claire almost left before registration because insecurity still followed her everywhere. Most attendees appeared polished and intimidating. Women in designer suits speaking confidently about mergers and acquisitions. Men discussing market forecasts over expensive coffee. Claire felt painfully out of place. But then the keynote speaker walked onto stage. Margaret Hale. At 62 years old, Margaret carried the kind of presence that silenced rooms without effort. Former CEO, investment strategist, one of the most respected businesswomen in the country. Claire expected another generic motivational speech about ambition and resilience. Instead, Margaret opened with a sentence that immediately captured her attention. The most dangerous employee in any company is the woman who has spent years being underestimated. Claire's heartbeat quickened. Margaret spoke for nearly 90 minutes about invisible labor, corporate manipulation, emotional conditioning, and how highly capable women often spend decades supporting powerful men while receiving almost none of the recognition attached to the success they helped create. Claire sat frozen through the entire lecture because it felt less like business education and more like someone describing her life publicly to strangers. Then Margaret said something Claire would remember forever. Some women don't discover their power until betrayal removes the distraction of trying to save everyone else. Claire felt tears threaten her eyes instantly. After the seminar ended, attendees crowded around Margaret seeking introductions and networking opportunities. But Claire remained seated long after most people left. She felt emotionally exposed in ways she could barely explain. Eventually, she gathered her things quietly and headed toward the exit, only to hear Margaret's voice behind her. "You looked like someone recognizing herself during that speech." Claire turned, startled. Margaret stood alone beside the stage steps, studying her calmly. Claire attempted a polite smile. "I think a lot of women probably felt that way." Margaret shook her head slightly. "No, most women nodded politely. You looked angry." The accuracy of the observation stunned Claire silent. Margaret invited her for coffee in the hotel lounge downstairs. Claire almost declined out of habit before realizing she was once again preparing to make herself smaller in front of someone powerful. So instead, she accepted. Their conversation lasted nearly 3 hours. For the first time since the divorce, Claire spoke honestly without minimizing her pain to make others comfortable. She described the affair. Vanessa, the public humiliation, the years spent quietly supporting Daniel's company. Margaret listened carefully, occasionally asking sharp questions that forced Claire deeper into uncomfortable truths. Finally, Margaret leaned back thoughtfully. "So let me understand this clearly," she said. "You helped develop operational systems for a multi-million-dollar architecture firm, stabilized investor relations during a recession, built internal communication frameworks, and managed client retention strategy for over 20 years. Yet you still describe yourself as someone with no real business experience?" Claire blinked. Hearing her life summarized that way sounded absurd. "I never had the title," she admitted softly. Margaret's expression hardened slightly. "Claire, powerful people have been using women without titles since the beginning of corporate history." The sentence hit like a lightning strike. Margaret continued. "Tell me something honestly. If your name had been Charles instead of Claire, do you think people would describe your contributions as just helping?" Claire had no answer. Before leaving, Margaret handed Claire a business card containing only her private email address and one sentence handwritten across the back, standing closer to power than you realize. For days afterward, Claire carried that card everywhere. Meanwhile, Daniel's public life continued appearing perfect online. Though tiny fractures had started surfacing beneath the polished surface, industry blogs quietly questioned Bennett Architectural Group's aggressive expansion choices. Ours' anonymous employees posted negative reviews describing chaotic leadership. One article mentioned investor uncertainty surrounding recent management instability. Claire tried ignoring the updates, but curiosity became impossible to suppress completely. Then came the photograph. Olivia sent it accidentally one evening after seeing it circulate through social media. Daniel and Vanessa standing together outside an upscale restaurant, smiling at photographer during a charity fundraiser. Vanessa wore another one of Claire's old bracelets. Claire stared at the image while something inside her finally shifted permanently. Not sadness, not grief, disgust, because she suddenly understood Vanessa's behavior had never truly been about love or Daniel himself. Vanessa collected victories through humiliation. She enjoyed possession more than connection. The bracelet was not jewelry, it was messaging. Psychological theater designed to remind Claire she had been replaced publicly and completely. Except something unexpected happened when Claire looked at the photo this time. She no longer felt small. She looked at Daniel's forced smile, Vanessa's performative confidence, the desperate luxury surrounding them both. And for the first time, Claire noticed insecurity hiding underneath their perfection. People who are truly happy rarely work this hard to advertise it. That realization became another turning point. The following morning, Claire emailed Margaret Hale. Their mentorship developed gradually afterward through meetings, phone calls, and strategy sessions that challenged Claire intellectually in ways she had not experienced for years. Margaret introduced her to investment language, corporate acquisition structures, executive psychology, leadership positioning. Claire absorbed everything obsessively, often studying until 2 or 3 in the morning because, for the first time in decades, she felt mentally alive again. And slowly, quietly, Claire Bennett transformed. Not externally at first. The changes happened internally. She stopped apologizing before expressing opinions, stopped shrinking during conversations, stopped immediately assuming other people deserved authority more than she did. Therapy helped. Margaret helped. But most importantly, humiliation itself had stripped away Claire's fear of disappointing people who never protected her anyway. Months passed. Spring arrived over Chicago. One afternoon, Margaret invited Claire to a private investor board networking event held inside a luxury high-rise overlooking the city skyline. Claire nearly refused from nerves, but Margaret interrupted firmly. At one point during the evening, Claire found herself standing beside a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the Chicago skyline while several investors discussed struggling mid-sized firms vulnerable to acquisition. Most of the conversation blurred together until one company name suddenly caught her attention. Bennett Architectural Group. Claire kept her expression neutral while an older investor explained the situation quietly to the group. Declining profitability, over-leveraged expansion, internal instability, reputation concerns. Claire listened without speaking, though every nerve in her body sharpened instantly. Then someone asked the question, "Can the company survive another year without restructuring?" A brief silence followed. Finally, another investor answered carefully, "Not unless leadership changes." Claire felt something cold settle calmly inside her chest. For years, Daniel Bennett controlled every emotional outcome in her life. He controlled the atmosphere in their marriage, the pace of conversations, the narrative after the divorce, even the humiliation itself. But standing there among executives discussing his company like a vulnerable asset instead of an untouchable empire, Claire experienced a realization so powerful it almost made her dizzy. Daniel was not invincible. He never had been. He had simply spent years surrounding himself with people willing to believe he was. That night, Claire barely slept. Not because of pain this time, but because possibility itself can become intoxicating once someone has spent years believing they have none. Around 3 in the morning, she walked downstairs into the dark kitchen and stared through the windows at the empty street outside, while memories replayed in fragments. Daniel laughing at investor dinners while taking credit for her systems. Vanessa smiling during that charity gala while wearing Claire's necklace. The years Claire spent minimizing herself to preserve peace inside relationships built around her silence. Then she remembered something Margaret once told her. Power rarely announces itself loudly. Most real power enters rooms quietly while everyone is distracted by performance. Claire smiled faintly to herself, because Daniel and Vanessa had spent 3 years performing happiness publicly, while Claire rebuilt herself privately. And private rebuilding is dangerous when nobody notices it happening. Over the next 6 months, Claire became deeply involved with Margaret's investment group, Hale Strategic Holdings. At first, she worked quietly, as a consultant analyzing operational structures for struggling companies. Her observations impressed executives quickly because Claire noticed inefficiencies others overlooked. Years of operating invisibly inside Daniel's company had sharpened her instincts. She understood personalities as much as numbers: ego, fear, leadership weakness, organizational decay. Claire knew how corporations collapse emotionally before they collapse financially because she had watched it happen slowly inside her own marriage first. Margaret trusted her more with each passing month. Meanwhile, Daniel's situation worsened. Industry articles grew harsher. Several executives resigned unexpectedly. Investors demanded answers regarding financial inconsistencies tied to failed luxury development projects Vanessa reportedly encouraged heavily during branding expansion. Rumors circulated quietly that Daniel's decision-making had become emotional and erratic. Then came the moment everything changed. Margaret invited Claire into her office late one Friday afternoon and closed the door behind them. "We're preparing an acquisition move," she said calmly. Claire immediately understood. Daniel's company. Margaret nodded once. Claire sat silently while emotions collided violently inside her chest: fear, satisfaction, shock, rage, validation. After everything Daniel had done, fate was placing his collapsing company directly into the hands of the woman he discarded. Margaret watched her carefully. "You don't have to be involved," she said. "This can remain strictly business." But Claire already knew her answer. "No," she replied softly. "I think I do." The acquisition process unfolded quietly over the following months, through confidential negotiations and financial positioning invisible to the public. Daniel apparently believed he was securing emergency capital partnerships to stabilize the company. He had no idea Hale Strategic Holdings intended to assume controlling ownership gradually. And most importantly, he had no idea Claire Bennett now sat inside those meetings. The day of the final board presentation arrived on a gray November morning, almost exactly 3 years after Daniel first confessed the affair inside their kitchen. Claire stood alone inside a private conference room, adjusting the sleeve of her charcoal blazer while her reflection stared back from the glass walls surrounding her. She barely recognized herself anymore. Not because she looked different physically, though confidence had changed her posture dramatically over time. The real difference existed deeper than appearance. The old Claire would have entered this room terrified of judgment. This Claire walked in understanding she belonged there. Outside the conference room, senior executives from Bennett Architectural Group gathered anxiously, while acquisition documents circulated quietly between attorneys and investors. Daniel arrived 20 minutes late, wearing an expensive navy suit, and the exhausted expression of someone fighting to maintain control over circumstances already slipping away. Then he walked into the boardroom and saw Claire seated beside Margaret Hale. Everything stopped. The confusion on his face shifted so rapidly it almost looked painful. First disbelief, then shock, then something far worse: fear, real fear. Claire met his eyes calmly without smiling. "Good morning, Daniel."
Good morning.
Nobody else in the room
Good morning,
understood the
Daniel.
full history hidden
Thank
inside
you all
those
for
two
being
words,
here.
but Daniel did. Vanessa,
We're ready
seated
to discuss
beside
the
him farther
partnership.
down the table,
Good.
looked
Let's
equally
begin.
frozen as realization spread slowly across her face. Claire had not returned to beg for dignity. She had returned holding authority over their future. The meeting itself lasted nearly 3 hours. Claire spoke professionally throughout the presentation, discussing operational restructuring plans, financial recovery strategies, and executive transition recommendations with calm precision. Daniel barely spoke at all. Every time Claire outlined failures within the company, he understood she was describing damage partially created by his own arrogance. Vanessa attempted maintaining composure, but her confidence deteriorated visibly once she realized Claire possessed detailed knowledge about internal decisions neither of them expected her to understand. At one point, Daniel interrupted quietly. "You've been involved in this for how long?" Claire answered honestly. "Long enough. That response haunted him more than anger ever could have. By the end of the meeting, Hale Strategic Holdings officially acquired majority ownership of Bennett Architectural Group. Daniel retained a temporary executive position during restructuring, meaning technically, he now worked for Claire. News spread quickly through corporate circles over the following weeks. Business publications praised the acquisition as a strategic rescue operation led partially by Claire Bennett, whose operational expertise insiders increasingly acknowledged publicly. The irony fascinated people. The ex-wife quietly returning to save the very company her husband nearly destroyed after leaving her for another woman. But nobody knew the entire truth yet, because Claire never intended this to become simple revenge. Revenge alone fades too quickly. Sheet transformation. Daniel struggled badly during the restructuring period. Employees no longer treated him like an untouchable founder once ownership changed hands. Board members questioned decisions more aggressively. Investors requested direct oversight. And worst of all for Daniel, Claire remained calm through all of it. She never humiliated him publicly, never mocked him, never behaved emotionally. Her professionalism became unbearable because it forced him to confront his own behavior without distraction. Vanessa handled the transition even worse. The social status she once weaponized began evaporating almost immediately once financial uncertainty entered the picture. Invitations slowed. Friends became distant. Luxury circles that celebrated her relationship with Daniel suddenly treated them cautiously, now that scandal surrounded the company publicly. One afternoon, Vanessa requested a private meeting with Claire. Against everyone's advice, Claire agreed. Vanessa entered the office wearing elegance like armor again, though exhaustion showed clearly beneath it now. For several seconds, neither woman spoke. Finally, Vanessa broke the silence. "Are you enjoying this?" Claire studied her quietly before answering. No.
No?
Vanessa
You
seemed
thought this was
surprised.
about
Claire
revenge.
continued softly.
It stopped
You
being
thought
about
this was
revenge a
about
long time
revenge.
ago.
It stopped being about revenge a long time ago. Vanessa's jaw tightened. You always want people to feel smaller than you, Claire said calmly. That's how you survived. But eventually, people grow tired of shrinking for someone else's comfort. For the first time in their entire lives together, Vanessa had no clever response. Months later, federal investigators uncovered financial misconduct tied to several expansion projects approved during Daniel's leadership. Misuse of corporate funds, misreported expenses, investor manipulation. The scandal exploded publicly overnight. News stations camped outside headquarters. Business journals dissected every failure ruthlessly. Claire learned something devastating during the investigation. Daniel had not only betrayed her emotionally, he had been hiding massive financial instability during the final years of their marriage. Risky decisions, secret debts, desperation disguised as confidence. Vanessa knew portions of it too, though likely not everything. Suddenly, Claire understood why Daniel truly left. Not because Claire lacked excitement, because Claire knew him too well. People hiding collapse often run toward distraction instead of accountability. The federal investigation destroyed what remained of Daniel's reputation within a year. He avoided prison through settlements and cooperation agreements, but his career never recovered fully afterward. Vanessa left him quietly several months later, once the money and status disappeared. The glamorous relationship that once dominated social media dissolved almost overnight into silence. And strangely, Claire no longer cared. That was the part nobody talks about when discussing revenge. Eventually, healing removes the need for it entirely. 2 years later, Claire stood once again beneath golden ballroom lights during the annual Hale Strategic Leadership Gala, while hundreds of women applauded around her. But this event felt different from every corporate celebration before it. Because the building itself carried personal meaning. Claire had purchased Daniel's unfinished luxury architectural project after the scandal collapsed construction entirely. Then she transformed it. Not into another corporate tower, into the Bennett Center for Women in Transition, a leadership and recovery foundation, helping women rebuild financially and emotionally after divorce, betrayal, emotional abuse, and career displacement. Women filled the ballroom that night. Former stay-at-home mothers rebuilding careers, survivors of manipulative relationships, older women starting businesses after decades of invisibility. Women's society often overlooks once they pass youth. Claire looked around the room and saw herself reflected everywhere. Not broken women, rebuilding women. There is a difference. During her closing speech that evening, Claire paused briefly, while emotion tightened unexpectedly in her throat. 3 years ago, she said softly. I believed losing everything meant my life was ending. What I didn't understand then was that sometimes losing the role people assigned you is the first step toward meeting the person you were supposed to become. The audience stood applauding for nearly a full minute, and somewhere near the back of the ballroom, unnoticed by almost everyone else, Daniel Bennett stood silently watching. Older now, smaller somehow. Claire saw him only briefly, but she did not feel hatred anymore, only distance, because the opposite of love is not anger, it is indifference. As the evening ended and guests slowly disappeared into the Chicago night, Claire remained alone near the ballroom windows, overlooking the city skyline. Snow drifted softly through golden streetlights below, while music echoed faintly behind her. 22 years of marriage, 3 years of humiliation, and one painful transformation later, Claire finally understood something important. The people who tried hardest to break her were also the people who accidentally forced her to discover how powerful she had been all along. And sometimes, the greatest revenge is becoming someone they can never reach again.